Good afternoon and welcome to today's STS 135 mission status briefing, the first for the final mission of Atlantis. We have today Quatziala Barujo, the lead flight director for this mission. He'll start off with some opening comments and then we'll move on to your questions. Quatzi?
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon to some of you. We've had an absolutely outstanding morning on orbit. Today we executed the inspection of the shuttle's thermal protection system that was carried out by manipulating the shuttle's robotic arm as well as the orbiter boom sensor system to do detailed scans of the wing leading edge, the shuttle's nose cap, and other areas associated with ground support umbilicals. Those scans were executed in absolute professional style by our crew, led by Commander Chris Ferguson, pilot Doug Hurley, mission specialists Sandy Magnus and Rex Walheim. They got through all of the activities of the inspection and ended up running about an hour to an hour and a half ahead of time. Now, as far as the efficiencies that they gained in executing the activities, about 30 to 35 minutes of that time was due to them just executing things quite well and being very efficient. But they also chose to work through their lunch break. We typically give them about an hour for lunch. And so because they worked through their lunch break to try to get ahead of the timeline, we ended up completing the inspections an hour ahead of schedule. What the crew has left on their day today is checkout of their rendezvous tools, as well as checkout of the orbiter docking system. Both of these are required in preparation for rendezvous and docking tomorrow. Additionally, we have a second of two rendezvous burns that were on the plan today. We executed the so-called NC2 burn earlier today, and now we're going to execute the NC3 burn in just a couple of hours. We're going to do that burn about an hour and a half earlier than we had originally scheduled it in the timeline. And basically that's to give the crew credit for finishing the TPS inspections early. We'll let them do their rendezvous burn early, and thus we can give them a little bit more of a relaxed pre-sleep time frame tonight so that they won't be as fatigued going into the critical phases of rendezvous and docking in the morning. We continue to observe stellar performance from Atlantis. The ship has been performing in beautiful fashion. We're not tracking any significant issues. The spacecraft and her crew all seem to be doing very well. And honestly, we couldn't be more happy with what we've seen from the crew and from Atlantis in this first half of Flight Day 2. So we're looking forward to a productive rest of the afternoon. We're looking forward to putting the crew to bed on time. They may even have some time to get to bed a little early if they wish. And I think we'll be in good shape for an excellent rendezvous and docking with the International Space Station tomorrow. That concludes my opening comments, and we'll be happy to take your questions.
Okay. We'll start here with questions at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and then we'll move on to our phone bridge participants. Questions from here in Houston? Philip?
Philip Sloss with NASASpaceflight.com. The crew got, as you said, the crew got way ahead of the timeline today on the inspections. Is that typical for them? And do you think that's going to help you during the docked phase with all of the work that needs to be done?
Okay, those are great questions. The performance of the activities on Flight Day 2 are often subject to a lot of variability. Depends on the crews, how the crews are feeling, as well as the overall tasking, the number of people we have on the flight deck. Today, I think we had a lot of things working in our favor. First of all, even though we do have a smaller crew, and of course that tends to put pressure on getting the activities completed on time, we did have fewer bodies for the crew to trip over. Also, we are flying a very experienced crew that knows how to adapt to space conditions, and so I think their adaptation to space has gone very quickly relative to what we sometimes see from other crews. And so all of these things taken in tandem, their experience really allowed us to get ahead on the timeline and to execute things efficiently. So we're quite pleased. We have seen this type of performance before, although I think the performance of this particular crew on this set of activities is probably near record-breaking. I think we really were able to squeeze out considerable efficiencies from this crew today.
Mark?
Thanks, Mark Carreau for Aviation Week. I had a couple of questions. One, I wondered during the inspection, at least from what you could see in the control center, did anything jump out, or did you see basically pretty normal TPS?
Okay, another great question. We did not see anything so far that gave us great pause. Nothing that was immediately visible to the naked eye. Now, of course, as you know, the process of analyzing the data we get from the sensor package on the OBSS takes several hours, and we do expect that process to go normally. So we'll hear official word concerning the condition of the reinforced carbon-carbon components of the thermal protection system. We'll probably hear that late tomorrow. Maybe early in the morning, depending on how the engineers are doing. But there was nothing that immediately gave us pause or that we were concerned about going into the inspection. And we also saw very good debris performance from the tank on the way uphill yesterday. So that also was very encouraging to us. And in fact, we were extremely happy with the launch yesterday, as you can imagine, which is a testament not only to the excellent performance of the team there at Kennedy Space Center, but also the wonderful performance of the Ascent team under the leadership of Mr. Richard Jones. So we were very comfortable and very happy looking at the TPS going into the inspection today, and we'll see what the detailed scans reveal to us tomorrow.
Thanks. My other question sort of had to do with the pace of work. You mentioned today that that Chris Ferguson and his crew got ahead 60 to 90 minutes. In fact, there's a lot to do on this mission, and I wonder how cognizant you are in the control center of trying to kind of stay up on everything so that you don't fall behind. And I guess that's kind of a quality, not a quantitative question, but I just wonder how conscious you are of trying to make sure that they don't fall back into a corner where they can't dig themselves out. Thanks.
Okay. For all of the controllers on the flight control team, starting with the flight director, myself, our Capcom, as well as the other controllers, we all try to imagine ourselves executing the activities that the crew has to execute. Each systems discipline specialist in the flight control room monitors their activities, and our first mandate really is to stay abreast of what the crew is doing and try to imagine and visualize what they're doing as they prepare to throw switches, as they are executing robotics operations, as they work today for the TPS inspection. And the benefit that we as mission controllers can provide to the crew is that we can, having imagined what they are doing and having focused intently on each of their tasks, we can try to anticipate areas where they might run into problems, areas where they might have some tasking conflicts, and recommend some redirection, if you will, or some additional efficiencies which might not have been built into the pre-flight timeline and which the crew themselves might not have been able to think of. And so that's one of the things that worked in our favor today is we had not only wonderful performance from the crew, but my flight control team also did a fantastic job doing what I asked them to do and what they have trained to do, which is to look ahead, to stay in perfect lockstep with the crew. And we actually did recommend some surgical changes to the sequence of events that allowed them to extract the maximum efficiency from their great performance.
Dan Vergano with USA Today. I had two questions. The first is, could you discuss a little bit about what goes into the decision about extending the mission at this point? Is it mostly how much fuel and propellant gets used in the maneuver with the space station tomorrow, or is it sort of overall performance that sort of builds you the margin to do that?
Okay, it's actually all the above as far as what goes into our decision to extend a day. In fact, I'm glad you asked that, because we do have some run time on our fuel cells, and what I can report to you today is that with respect to our most limiting consumable, which in this case is the cryogenic oxygen and hydrogen required to generate electrical power, with respect to those consumables, we lifted off with sufficient oxygen and hydrogen to give us what we believe is about 22 to 23 hours above our nominal 12 plus 0 plus 2-day timeline. So we are executing the power-conserving measures that we developed pre-flight. And so we're going to continue to watch the system over the next day or two. And I fully expect that by about flight day 4, we'll be able to report to you that we are seeing stable enough margins to where we can recommend extending a day. We carried sufficient propellant to orbit with us to extend a day with no problem. And as I said, we've got sufficient quantity of other consumables, and the crew seems to be doing very well. So I think we will probably get there. Again, don't take that to the bank until we talk in another day or two. But right now, everything is on track for us to be able to extend a day as long as we continue to see good performance from the crew, good performance from the spacecraft, and as long as the other mission activities go nominally.
And my second question was regarding just the quickness with which they were able to do the inspection today. Could you, just to, maybe I'm repeating the previous question, but how much of that was this sort of crew doing a good job at this, and how much of it was not seeing any marks that made you, or problems that made you stop and inspect more carefully at a position?
Okay. Well, let me further address by saying that the presence or absence of any issues or any occlusions or imperfections in the thermal protection system, that has no bearing on the amount of time that it takes. We have a very set pattern of scan over the RCC that we will execute in all cases, whether there are any areas of concern. Now, if there are areas of concern that we identify prior to the scan, we may take an additional time to stop and stare, if you will, once we get to that point in the scan. But generally, that has no bearing on it. What really allowed us to get from the beginning of the TPS inspection to the end this time as quickly as we did, I believe was a positive convergence of all of the positive behaviors that we've tried to build into this aspect of the mission, starting with the flight plan. Our flight activities officer and other planners put together a very efficient sequence of events in cooperation with all of the various subsystem owners who make the inputs. So we started with an efficient plan. The training team contributed tremendously to the success today in training our crew to execute these activities efficiently, as well as training the flight control team and training us together and challenging us to think about where we can extract further efficiencies. And then, of course, there is the actual on-orbit crew who is very experienced and have given great attention to finding ways to be efficient and finding ways to leverage the human resource that they have on board in the best possible manner. So you put all of these things together, and it ended up working to our benefit today. In past missions, we may have great performance in, say, 3 out of 4 of these areas, and we may finish on time or may finish only slightly later than we planned. And in other missions, we might see some misalignment with respect to satellite availability and our ability to get the sensor data down in real time, as well as we did today. So it really is a combination of all of these factors, which no one of which is more important than the other, in my view, that have really worked to the good today. So hopefully that helps explain that a bit more.
Okay, we're going to go now to questions from the phone bridge. I think first on our list is the Associated Press.
Yes, thanks. Seth Borenstein at AP, and if I do have a follow-up. Just going that you said you were on a near record pace for efficiency here. Also, you can't help but notice when looking at the flight execute package, no anomalies whatsoever. I'm wondering if you can look at this, and have you seen such a clean first full day in orbit combined with such an efficient day? I'm wondering if this is, once you've got into orbit, one of the cleanest, best, most efficient flights you've seen. I mean, I know you're relatively new in the position, but in general, is this one of the best starts so far to a mission?
I think this is certainly one of the better starts that we have seen. And I'll tell you, one area where I think that Atlantis has really helped us is the absence of anomalies also equals the relative absence of distraction from the efficiencies that you try to gain in executing the nominal timeline. You know, even though we haven't had really serious problems with the shuttle in a while, when you do have the random heater failure or a sensor bias or some other little thing, you know, we go through a fairly rigorous process to try to examine anomalies and to try to make sure that they are not symptoms of more serious problems that might be threatening to the mission or threatening to the spacecraft or crew. And so examining every failure or every anomaly that we have does take considerable mental resource on the part of our flight control team. The relative absence of that, I think, has allowed our team to focus more on executing the nominal timeline. And so one has to believe that that's helped contribute to the efficiency of today so far.
Follow up on that. Here you are. It is one of the cleanest, best flights ever. It is also the last one. Don't you find it a little ironic and disturbing that here you're reaching sort of the pinnacle of efficiency and you know, just flying well, and it ends? In a way, wouldn't it be easier if the shuttles were showing their age at the end than showing just maturity instead of age?
Yeah, I can certainly appreciate your observation. I personally, instead of focusing on the irony, I tend to look at the opportunity. On this, the last shuttle mission of the program, I'm very grateful that the spacecraft is behaving as well as it is so that we can finish strong, finish safely. As you all have heard me say before, my team's #1 focus is on ending this mission and ending the program as safely as we have flown last missions. And so the great condition of the spacecraft is really helping us to do that so far, and I see that as a tremendous opportunity. It helps us enjoy the mission more, honestly, when we're not as worried about falling behind the timeline. And of course, we still have to be very vigilant. You know, this is just flight day 2. We've got plenty more opportunities to fall behind and experience problems, but we'll do our best to avoid that.
Okay, I think next up is CBS.
Hey, Quatsi, it's Bill Harwood. Just a real quick one. Looking ahead to docking, can you talk a little bit in detail about what the crew does with 4 people on board for docking that makes it a little more of a challenge than when you have, say, 6 or 7 on board? Thanks.
Sure thing. The big thing for my team to be cognizant of, and the thing that we have put some extra emphasis on in training, is the fact that as we get to those closer terminal phases of the approach and docking, pretty much all of the crew members, all 4 of them, will be on the flight deck, each of them playing a different and critical role in actually executing the safe approach and docking. For instance, Commander Chris Ferguson will be at the stick, if you will, controlling the thrusters and guiding the spacecraft into the approach and docking. The pilot Doug Hurley will be assisting with management of the guidance, navigation, and control system, management of the autopilot, management of the thruster configurations, which have to change a few times between the various phases of the approach and docking. Mission specialists Sandy Magnus and Rex Walheim will be doing a combination of communicating with the ground as well as sighting on the International Space Station with the manual range-finding devices like the handheld laser. And so when you think about the flow of things that have to occur there on the flight deck for a successful approach and docking, all 4 of them will really be engaged, especially as we get very close, after we execute the RPM and start to maneuver onto the V-bar for the final approach. And so what that means for us is that if there are sort of any random things, and I don't want to say necessarily random, but miscellaneous things is a good term, miscellaneous systems reconfigurations that have to be done, because we're going to be filling water bags to prepare to transfer to the ISS, which means that we'll have some switch throws that we have to execute from time to time to fill the water, to start the fills, stop the fills, change bags, reconfigure the pressure control system to manage the pressure in the cabin, various other ancillary things that are not directly related to actually physically flying the bird. Those things we've got fewer hands and fewer minds available to really give attention to those things, which means that for MCC, we have to be much more surgical in how we call up those instructions and in how we manage the systems, because we're used to having plenty of people around either on the mid deck or the flight deck to reconfigure the heaters on the cryogenic oxygen and nitrogen and hydrogen tanks, or to start and stop water bag fills. We just have to be a little bit more judicious about how we manage those systems so that we can delay those calls when appropriate and get them in when we've got the opportunity.
Anything else from you, Bill? Well, we're not hearing Mr. Harwood any further, so let's move on to Tarek Malik with Space.com.
Thank you very much, Kwasi. It's Tarek Malik from Space.com, and I've got, I think, one and a follow-up. One is referring to the surveys today. You mentioned near record-breaking or record-setting for the crew's performance today. I was wondering if you had kind of an exact number in terms of how long it took, or if they had a really efficient number of robotic arm moves. If you had any of those kinds of statistics for the survey today, that would be great.
I apologize, Tarek. I really don't. I'd have to go back through all of the previous TPS surveys that we've done. Typically, the crews do run. They're either able to get ahead or finish on time by working through lunch. In fact, I dare say most of the crews work through their lunch time to do the inspections. A lot of times what we will see, and what is typical of the Flight Day 2 inspections, is that we tend to run a bit behind on executing the first part of the inspection, which is the starboard wing survey. We tend to run behind sometimes because either communication coverage for the satellites doesn't line up for us, because we share those satellites with other users, of course. And so sometimes that might delay us in execution of some of the activities. Sometimes the crews are just a little bit slower because they just might not be feeling as well due to space adaptation, and therefore they take a little bit of extra time to make sure that they do things right, given that they're not necessarily feeling at their peak. And so what we usually see, I would say, Tarek, more often than not, what we usually see is that for the first one or two phases of the inspection, we are running a bit behind, and then we sort of make up the deficit by working through the crew's lunch, such that at the end of the day, we've sort of ended on time. And so what was very unusual about today is that we didn't fall behind at all, but we actually ran ahead, and the crew still chose to contribute their lunch period to work through the inspections, and therefore we ended up getting very far ahead. So I'm sorry I don't have an exact figure for you, but that's probably the best way I could describe what's happened today.
Thank you. I think just two more real quick ones. I'm just wondering, with there only being 4 folks on the shuttle, if they've kind of mentioned at all to Mission Control, even in passing, if it does feel a bit more roomier, if it's a little bit more comfortable, if they've told you anything like that.
Okay, the crew has not mentioned anything about that to us. However, as a flight director, I've gone through much of the training that the crew has gone through, at least a lot of the mock-up training and classroom training that they've gone through as part of my own certification. And my Capcom, who's a flown astronaut, Dr. Steve Robinson, who's a veteran space flyer, he very much helps calibrate us on what the crew's conditions might be, and we understand sort of what they're doing from minute to minute and from activity to activity, and we know for a fact that the shuttle definitely feels roomier to them. In fact, it's probably usually much more cramped with 6 or 7 people on board than we usually hear, because astronauts really don't like to complain at all. So we know that is creating some great conditions for them. It's probably helping the environment as far as the air quality and the air temperature feel much more comfortable to them without an additional 2 or 3 bodies throwing heat and CO2 into the atmosphere. So all these things, I think they're probably quite comfortable right now.
Thank you. And just my last question, I know that you started out work on the station before switching to shuttle flight control, and tomorrow will be the last shuttle docking at the space station, and I'm wondering if what that might mean to you and to your team, and if you have any insights what that might mean to the crew, because I know they'll be busy with the actions as opposed to with the reflecting on the moment in the morning tomorrow. Thanks.
Well, with each mission, there are several events that really are defining moments, I believe, several nominal events that are defining moments in the mission. Launch, of course, is one of the most important. Landing is one of the most important. Docking and undocking, as well as the EVAs, whenever there are EVAs on a mission, those tend to be defining moments and very unique and well-defined milestones. The docking tomorrow represents one of those milestones to me. That will be a significant hurdle as far as accomplishing the mission and concluding it safely. And so, my team generally tends to feel a great sense of relief and accomplishment whenever we successfully dock a shuttle to the International Space Station. Space Station team, I know, feels the same way because I've been in that boat and have worked a rendezvous and docking on the station side as well. For me personally, I consider it really a tremendous honor. To use a term that we heard earlier, almost ironic, that I, as a homegrown space station flight controller and somebody that started my flight director career on the space station side, has the privilege, and it really is a privilege, to be able to guide the very last space shuttle to its very last docking with the International Space Station. I still feel a tremendous sense of responsibility for the space station, even when I'm at the helm of the shuttle flight control team. And I feel a tremendous responsibility for the space shuttle, obviously. And so I just feel a great sense of gratitude, really, at being able to participate in this historic rendezvous and docking.
Okay, we'll move on to Florida Today.
Thanks very much, James Dean from Florida Today. Kwasi, just kind of following up on that last questions as you're reflecting on this stuff. The RPM, if not a defining moment, certainly among the more dramatic that we get to see during flights. So just wondering, maybe that's something you have a chance to sort of take in and enjoy more as opposed to the intensity of the docking operation. And specifically, I was wondering, I don't remember seeing that 1,000 millimeter camera. Do you have extra cameras on this RPM or if so, for any reason?
Okay. On the last mission, as you know, we did use the camera with the 1,000 millimeter lens to take pictures of Endeavor's TPS system, Endeavor's tiles, just to give us some higher resolution pictures. The 800 millimeter lens photos and the 400 that are standard, they're more than sufficient. The 1,000 millimeter photos just gave us even better data. We plan to get 1,000 millimeter photos on this RPM as well. So we do have that called out in the crew's timeline, and they're prepared to do that unless there are some problems that arise or some tasking issues that arise for the station crew that would preclude that. For this RPM tomorrow, I'm very much hoping that we end up having good KU band, high data rate comm coverage from the International Space Station. On my last shuttle flight as lead flight director, that was STS 130 in February of 2010, we were fortunate because the trajectory for that launch worked out such that we had good line of sight with the ISS high rate communication system, and the ISS was able to downlink in real time video of the shuttle and Endeavor for that mission, performing its RPM. And that was a very, very special moment for my controllers in the shuttle flight control room, who were heavily engaged in that rendezvous and docking. I'm hoping that we have similar luck tomorrow. If we don't, then of course we'll do what we normally do, which is again focus intensely on the execution of the activities, watch the data, so that we can help the crew. But hopefully we've got some good visuals that we can get in real time to really commemorate, I should say, and help us enjoy these moments. One of the things that I do think about on the rare occasion that I'm not thinking about actual mission execution, I think about something that Gene Kranz said in one of the specials that was filmed about the Apollo era, how when he looks back on it, he remembers that he and his team, in his words, didn't really enjoy the moment of landing on the moon as much as many other people did, because they were so intensely focused on the tasks that they had to perform, which were monitoring the health and performance of the spacecraft, making sure everything went well, making sure that nobody got hurt or killed as they attempted to land on the moon and as the astronauts stepped out on the moon. Obviously, our priority is monitoring the spacecraft, making sure that everything is executed flawlessly. But being able to see pictures in real time whenever we are fortunate enough to be able to get that without having to downlink it later, those are just bonuses that make the moment special, so that these people with whom I have the privilege of sharing this mission, we can look each other in the eye and today and tomorrow and maybe a year or so from now and say, wow, do you remember when we saw Atlantis doing a backflip underneath the space station for the very last time? Wow, wasn't that special? So we'll see.
Thanks. I also just want to ask you, you've mentioned space adaptation a couple times. Can you speak a little bit to, what's typical for, any given crew or crew member to experience? And, I know it varies, every individual is different, but is it something that having flown before, automatically makes less likely, or there's things these guys would learn to do to mitigate it, or is it just kind of random or lucky whether you feel it or not?
It's a very complex subject. One of the things that's fortunate is we have a tremendous amount of data from human subjects on space adaptation. One of the things that we've seen from the data is that there is considerable variability based on crew members. There are some crew members who have flown in space for the very first time and barely get sick or barely have any issues. There are some crew members who are veteran flyers and they, have some discomfort like clockwork. One of the things that we do know is that there are some countermeasures. There's some medical, there's some pharmacological countermeasures. There are just some good practice sort of things that help with adaptation. And although there is not a direct physiological correlation between the number of times a person's flown in space and how quickly they adapt, some of those procedural countermeasures, those things that tend to help crew members adapt. If you have flown before, they tend to know those things. They tend to be very well-versed in what has worked for them in the past and what doesn't work. And so that might provide a bit of an advantage. And of course, each of these crew members is a flown crew member. So again, that's not a precise answer, but then again, we know that when we're talking about human physiology, there are relatively few precise answers because people are different.
Just last real quick follow-up. Is it basically nausea we're talking about, or is it like dizziness or anything else?
All of the above.
Thanks.
Okay. We'll bring the questions back here to Johnson Space Center. Phil?
Philip Sloss with NASASpaceflight.com again. A bookkeeping question on your cryo margins. Do you need to get 24 hours above your 12+0, or is it more than that?
Okay, great question. For us to really in good conscience commit to an extra energy-dependent day, we like to see at least some positive margin above the additional day. So for instance, our baseline mission duration for this flight is 12+0+2. At launch, we were able to show about 23 hours. So for us to commit to the extra day, we want to see well over 24 hours. It doesn't have to be 24 and a half per se, but if we are showing a stable amount of margin that's over 24, so that we know we've got that extra day sort of in the bank, that's pretty much what would give us a lot of confidence that we can count on that extra day.
Anything else here? All right, with that, we'll wrap up this briefing. Just a look ahead on the television schedule. We'll have today's mission management team briefing at 3 p.m. Central, 4 Eastern. And then Atlantis' crew is scheduled to go to sleep at 6:29 p.m. Central, 7:29 Eastern. Remember that all the latest information on the STS-135 mission is available on the internet at www.nasa.gov. Thanks for coming.
Hi, I'm James O'Connor.
I'm Christina Gasling.
I'm Kevin Metrocavage.
I'm Moose Kimball.
I'm Jonathan Huffman.
And I'm Pooja Joshi. We are the Attitude Determination Control Officer team on the final shuttle mission.
And you're watching NASA TV.